The sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful evening at Romano's family restaurant. Tanya Williams looked up from wiping down table 12, her heart stopping as she saw two large men cornering a well-dressed businessman near the back exit. The man in the expensive navy blue suit was pressed against the wall, his hands raised defensively as the attackers moved closer. "Give us everything you've got, rich boy," snarled the bigger attacker, his fist clenched. "Please, I don't want any trouble," the businessman said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Tanya's 7-year-old daughter Grace, who was sitting at the counter doing her homework, tugged at her mother's bright red uniform sleeve. "Mummy, can we help him?" the little girl whispered, her big brown eyes filled with concern. Every instinct told Tanya to stay back, to call the police, to protect her daughter first. But something about Grace's innocent question and the terror she saw in the stranger's face made her move forward instead of away. "Hey!" Tanya called out firmly, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "Leave him alone." The attackers spun around, surprised by her intervention. "Mind your own business, lady," the second man growled. "This is my business," Tanya replied, stepping closer despite her racing heart. "This is where I work and nobody gets hurt here on my watch." The businessman looked at her with amazement. Here was a woman he'd never met, risking herself for a complete stranger. "You sure you want to get involved in this?" the first attacker asked, taking a step toward Tanya. "I'm sure," she said, pulling out her phone. "And I already called the police. They'll be here any minute." It was a bluff, but it worked. The two men looked at each other nervously. "This isn't over," one of them muttered, and they both rushed toward the front door, pushing past other customers who had just noticed the commotion. Tanya immediately went to the businessman who was leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "I think I'm all right," he said, straightening his tie. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Tanya said simply. "Grace, bring me some water from behind the counter, please." The little girl hurried over with a glass of water, which the man accepted gratefully. "You're very brave, young lady," he told Grace, who beamed with pride. "My mommy says we should always help people when they're scared," Grace replied with the wisdom that only children possess. The man looked at Tanya with new respect. "Your daughter is remarkable. And so are you." Mrs. Patterson, the elderly restaurant manager, came rushing over. "What happened here?" "I heard glass breaking." "These two men were bothering this gentleman," Tanya explained. "They ran off when I told them I called the police." "Should we actually call them now?" Mrs. Patterson asked. The businessman shook his head. "They're gone. I don't think they'll be back." But Tanya noticed he was holding his side and wincing slightly. "You are hurt. Let me take you to the hospital." "That's not necessary. I'm fine, really." "No, you're not," Tanya said firmly. "Grace, get your backpack. We're taking this gentleman to get checked out." "But what about your shift?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "This is more important," Tanya replied, helping the man toward the door. "I'll make up the hours tomorrow." As they walked to her old car, the man tried to process what had just happened. A complete stranger had put herself at risk to protect him, and now she was taking him to the hospital without expecting anything in return. "I'm Jonathan, by the way," he said as Tanya helped him into the passenger seat. "Jonathan Mitchell. I'm Tanya Williams, and this is my daughter Grace." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Jonathan," Grace chirped from the back seat. "Mommy, can we get ice cream after the hospital?" "We'll see, baby," Tanya smiled, starting the engine of her 15-year-old Honda. Jonathan watched this amazing woman drive through the city, her daughter chattering happily in the back seat about her school day, and he realized his life had just changed forever. Not because of the attack, but because of the incredible kindness he had witnessed. Do you believe in fate? Could one act of kindness really change everything? Subscribe and let me know what you think will happen next between Tanya and Jonathan. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Jonathan made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to repay this family's kindness no matter what it took. The emergency room was busy that evening, but Tanya didn't hesitate to help Jonathan check in at the reception desk. Grace sat quietly in a green plastic chair, swinging her legs and watching everything with curious eyes. "The doctor will see you soon," the nurse told Jonathan, handing him a clipboard with forms to fill out. "Thank you both for this," Jonathan said, sitting down next to Tanya. "Most people would have just called 911. "Most people care more than you think," Tanya replied, watching Grace color in her homework workbook. "They just sometimes don't know how to show it." Jonathan studied Tanya's face as she spoke. Even in the harsh hospital lighting, she was beautiful. But it wasn't just her looks that impressed him. It was the gentle way she spoke to the nurses, how she made sure Grace had everything she needed, and how she seemed to genuinely care about his well-being. "Mommy, is Mr. Jonathan going to be okay?" Grace asked, looking up from her coloring. "The doctors are going to make sure of that, sweetheart," Tanya assured her daughter. "Jonathan Mitchell?" a doctor called from the doorway. Dr. Amanda Foster was a kind-faced woman in her 40s who examined Jonathan thoroughly. "You have some bruising on your ribs, but nothing appears to be broken. You were lucky." "I had help," Jonathan said, glancing toward the waiting area where Tanya and Grace were sitting. "Good friends are important," Dr. Foster agreed, writing on his chart. "Take it easy for a few days and come back if the pain gets worse." When they returned to the waiting area, Jonathan pulled out his wallet. "Please, let me pay for your gas money and maybe dinner for you and Grace." Tanya held up her hand politely. "That's not necessary. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, they wouldn't have," Jonathan said seriously. "And I've never met anyone like you or your daughter." Grace tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Jonathan, do you have kids?" "No, I don't," he answered, crouching down to her level. "That's sad," Grace said with the honest sympathy only children can offer. "Kids are fun. I could share my mommy with you if you want." Jonathan felt his heart skip a beat. "That's very sweet of you to offer." Tanya blushed slightly. "Grace, we should let Mr. Jonathan rest now." "Actually," Jonathan said, standing up slowly, "I was wondering if I could take you both to dinner tomorrow night. As a proper thank you." Tanya hesitated. "I work tomorrow evening. What time do you finish?" 9 o'clock, but that's too late for Grace to be out." "Then lunch this weekend?" Jonathan suggested hopefully. Grace bounced excitedly. "Can we, Mommy? Please?" Tanya looked at her daughter's eager face and then at Jonathan's sincere expression. "I suppose that would be all right. But somewhere casual. Grace is 7. "I know the perfect place," Jonathan smiled. "There's a family restaurant downtown that has the best chicken fingers in the city." As they walked back to Tanya's car, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about how different his evening had turned out. He had planned to grab a quick dinner alone before heading home to his empty penthouse. Instead, he had met the most remarkable woman and her wonderful daughter. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said as Tanya unlocked her car door. "Sure. Why did you really help me tonight? You could have been hurt." Tanya was quiet for a moment, helping Grace into her booster seat. "My grandmother always told me that we're all connected somehow. She said when we help others, we help ourselves find our purpose." "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She was. She raised me after my parents died. She would have liked Grace very much." Jonathan noticed the sadness in Tanya's voice. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. She taught me that kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything." As they drove Jonathan back to the restaurant parking lot to get his car, Grace fell asleep in the back seat. Her soft breathing filled the comfortable silence. "She's a special kid," Jonathan said quietly. "She's my whole world," Tanya replied. "Everything I do is for her." "Where's her father, if you don't mind me asking?" Tanya's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "He left when he found out I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad." "His loss," Jonathan said sincerely. "That's what I tell myself," Tanya smiled sadly. "Grace asks about him sometimes, but I just tell her that some people aren't meant to stay in our lives." They pulled into the restaurant parking lot where Jonathan's silver BMW was parked. "This is me," he said, pointing to the expensive car. Tanya whistled softly. "Nice ride." "It gets me around," Jonathan said modestly, though he was pleased she noticed. He got out carefully, still sore from the attack. "Thank you again, Tanya. For everything." "You're welcome. Take care of yourself." "Saturday at noon?" he asked hopefully. "For lunch." "Saturday at noon," Tanya confirmed with a smile that made Jonathan's heart race. As he watched her drive away, Jonathan realized he hadn't thought about work, his investments, or his business meetings once since the attack. All he could think about was Tanya's gentle laugh and Grace's innocent questions. He had built an empire worth billions, but tonight he felt like the richest man in the world simply because two strangers had shown him what real kindness looked like. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through the windows of Tanya's small apartment. Grace was already awake, sitting on her bed and picking out her favorite blue dress with white flowers. "Is this pretty enough for lunch with Mr. Jonathan?" Grace asked, holding up the dress. "It's beautiful, baby," Tanya said, though her own nerves were showing. She had changed outfits 3 times already, finally settling on a simple green sundress that Grace had picked out for her. "Are you excited, Mommy?" "A little nervous," Tanya admitted honestly. What? Mr. Jonathan is nice. He has kind eyes like Grandma Rose used to say about good people. Tanya smiled at her daughter's wisdom. Grace had never known her great-grandmother, but somehow she seemed to have inherited Rose's gift for seeing the best in people. They arrived at the family restaurant 15 minutes early, but Jonathan was already there, waiting at a corner table. He stood up when he saw them, and Tanya noticed he was wearing casual clothes, dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that made his eyes look even more striking. "You both look wonderful," he said, pulling out Tanya's chair for her. "Thank you," Tanya replied, feeling her cheeks warm. Grace climbed into her booster seat. "Mr. Jonathan, do you come here a lot?" "Actually, this is my first time," Jonathan confessed. "I asked my assistant to find the best family restaurant in the city." "You have an assistant?" Grace's eyes widened with curiosity. "I do. Her name is Jennifer and she helps me with my work." "What kind of work do you do?" Tanya asked, genuinely interested. Jonathan hesitated for a moment. "I own a technology company. We make software that helps other businesses." It was a simplified explanation. In reality, Jonathan's company was worth over $2 billion and employed thousands of people worldwide. But something told him that Tanya wouldn't be impressed by his wealth, and he wanted her to like him for who he was, not what he had. The waitress came over to take their order. Grace immediately asked for chicken fingers and chocolate milk, while Tanya chose a salad and iced tea. "I'll have the same as Grace," Jonathan announced, making the little girl giggle. "You want chicken fingers too?" "If they're good enough for you, they're good enough for me," Jonathan grinned. During lunch, Grace chattered about school, her favorite books, and her best friend Sophie. Jonathan listened intently, asking questions and laughing at her stories. Tanya watched in amazement as this successful businessman gave her daughter his complete attention. "Mr. Jonathan, do you like to read?" Grace asked between bites of chicken. "I do, but I mostly read boring workbooks." "That's sad. My mommy reads me stories every night. Maybe she could read to you too." Tanya nearly choked on her iced tea. "Grace, honey? I would love that," Jonathan said seriously. "What kind of stories does your mommy read?" "Adventure stories about brave princesses who save the day," Grace replied proudly. "Your daughter has excellent taste in literature," Jonathan told Tanya with a twinkle in his eye. After lunch, they walked to a nearby park where Grace ran ahead to the playground. Tanya and Jonathan sat on a bench, watching her climb on the monkey bars. "She's incredible," Jonathan said. "How do you do it all by yourself?" "You just do what you have to do," Tanya replied. "I work at the restaurant 5 nights a week and I clean offices on weekends. Grace goes to after-school care, and my neighbor Mrs. Johnson watches her when I work late." Jonathan frowned. "That sounds exhausting." "It's worth it. Grace is getting a good education, we have a roof over our heads, and we're happy." "But what about you? When do you get time for yourself?" Tanya shrugged. "Maybe when Grace goes to college. That's 15 years from now. I'll be 38. Still young enough to figure out what I want to be when I grow up." Tanya laughed. Jonathan studied her profile as she watched Grace play. "What did you want to be before Grace came along?" "A teacher. I was studying elementary education when I got pregnant. Had to drop out to work." "You could go back to school now." "With what money? And when?" "I can barely keep up with bills as it is." Jonathan felt a strong urge to offer help, but something told him to wait. This remarkable woman had too much pride to accept charity from a virtual stranger. Grace ran back to them slightly out of breath. "Can Mr. Jonathan push me on the swings?" "If he wants to," Tanya said. "I would be honored," Jonathan replied, standing up and offering Grace his hand. As Tanya watched Jonathan carefully push her daughter on the swings, making sure she was safe while also making her laugh, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Oh, not just for Grace but for herself. "Higher, Mr. Jonathan," Grace called out happily. "Are you sure you can handle it?" he teased. "I'm brave like my mommy." Jonathan looked over at Tanya, who was smiling widely. "Yes, you definitely are." When it was time to leave, Grace hugged Jonathan tightly. "Thank you for lunch and for pushing me on the swings." "Thank you for letting me join you," Jonathan replied, meaning every word. As they walked back to their cars, Jonathan turned to Tanya. "I had the best time today." "So did we. Would it be okay if I called you sometime this week?" Tanya hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that." They exchanged phone numbers and Jonathan watched them drive away in the old Honda. He stood in the parking lot for several minutes, unable to stop smiling. For the first time in his adult life, Jonathan Mitchell had found something more valuable than money or success. He had found a reason to believe in love. Over the next 2 weeks, Jonathan found himself thinking about Tanya and Grace constantly. He called Tanya every few days and their conversations grew longer each time. They talked about everything: books, movies, childhood memories, and dreams for the future. "Grace wants to know if you'd like to come to her school play next Friday," Tanya said during one of their evening phone calls. "She's in a play? What's it about?" "Community helpers. She's playing a teacher, which is ironic since that's what I always wanted to be. I would love to come." "What time?" 7 o'clock, but Jonathan, you don't have to. I know you're probably busy with important business things." "Nothing is more important than this," Jonathan said, and he meant it completely. The school auditorium was packed with proud parents when Jonathan arrived Friday evening. He found Tanya sitting in the third row, saving him a seat. "You came," she smiled, looking beautiful in a maroon dress. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." When Grace appeared on stage in her teacher costume, complete with glasses and a pointer, Jonathan felt his heart swell with pride as if she were his own daughter. "Look how confident she is up there," he whispered to Tanya. "She gets that from my grandmother." Rose never met a stranger and could talk to anyone about anything. After the play, Grace ran to them with excitement. "Mr. Jonathan, did you see me? I remembered all my lines." "You were amazing," Jonathan said, lifting her up in a hug. "The best teacher I've ever seen." "Really? Really? You made me want to go back to school." Grace giggled and hugged him tighter. As they walked to the parking lot, Tanya's old Honda wouldn't start. She turned the key several times, but the engine just made clicking sounds. "Not now," she muttered under her breath. "Car trouble?" Jonathan asked. "It's been making weird noises all week. I was hoping it would hold out until payday." Jonathan looked at the 10-year-old car with its dented bumper and faded paint. "Let me call my mechanic. He makes house calls." "Oh no, I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Please let me help." "But it's expensive to fix cars, especially on a Friday night." "Don't worry about that. Just let me help you and Grace get home safely." After a brief hesitation, Tanya nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I promise I'll pay you back." "There's nothing to pay back. You saved my life, remember?" Within 30 minutes, Jonathan's mechanic arrived. He diagnosed the problem as a dead battery and bad alternator. "I can fix it tomorrow morning," the mechanic told them. "Should run like new after that." "How much will it cost?" Tanya asked nervously. The mechanic looked at Jonathan, who gave him a subtle nod. "No charge, ma'am. Mr. Mitchell takes care of everything." That night, Jonathan drove Tanya and Grace home in his BMW. Grace fell asleep in the back seat and Tanya was unusually quiet. "You okay?" Jonathan asked as they pulled up to her apartment building. "Why are you doing all this?" Tanya asked softly. "What do you mean?" "The lunch, coming to Grace's play, fixing my car. What do you want from us?" Jonathan parked the car and turned to face her. "I want to be part of your lives. I want to take Grace to more school plays and help fix things when they break. I want to talk to you every day and make you both smile." "But why? You barely know us." "I know enough. I know that you're the kindest person I've ever met. I know that Grace is the most wonderful kid in the world. I know that when I'm with you both, I feel like the man I always wanted to be." Tanya looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of believing this is real. Of letting Grace get too attached. Of getting hurt again." Jonathan reached over and gently took her hand. "I would never hurt you or Grace. I promise you that. That's what her father said too. I'm not him." "I know. That's what scares me the most." Jonathan helped carry sleeping Grace upstairs to their small but tidy apartment. As Tanya tucked her daughter into bed, Grace opened her eyes sleepily. "Is Mr. Jonathan going to be my daddy?" she asked innocently. Tanya's breath caught. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." "But I like him. He makes you smile and he fixed our car." After Grace fell back asleep, Tanya walked Jonathan to the door. "I should probably take things slower," she said quietly. "Whatever you're comfortable with. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise." "Promise." As Jonathan drove home to his luxury penthouse, he thought about Tanya's small apartment with its second-hand furniture and Grace's drawings on the refrigerator. For the first time in his life he understood what home really meant. It wasn't about expensive things or impressive addresses. Home was wherever Tanya and Grace were. 3 weeks later, Tanya finally agreed to go on a real date with Jonathan, just the two of them. Grace would spend the evening with Mrs. Johnson, their neighbor, who had become like a grandmother to the little girl. "Where are we going?" Tanya asked as she got ready, trying on different outfits while Grace offered helpful advice. "Mr. Jonathan said it's a surprise," Grace announced importantly. "But he told me to tell you to wear something comfortable for walking." Tanya settled on dark jeans and a soft red sweater. When Jonathan arrived to pick her up, his face lit up with appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said, handing her a small bouquet of sunflowers. "These are my favorites." "How did you know?" "Grace told me you always stop to look at them at the grocery store." Tanya felt her heart flutter. He had been paying attention to small details about her life. "Be good for Mrs. Johnson," Tanya told Grace, giving her a hug. "Have fun on your date, Mommy," Grace whispered loud enough for Jonathan to hear, making both adults blush. Jonathan drove them to the historic downtown district, where street musicians played on corners and little shops stayed open late. They walked hand in hand, talking and laughing as they explored. "I've lived here my whole life and never really walked around like this," Tanya admitted. "I've been here 10 years and spent most of my time in office buildings and conference rooms," Jonathan replied. "Everything looks different when you have good company." They stopped at a small bookstore where Jonathan bought Grace a collection of fairy tales. Then they visited an art gallery featuring local artists. "Do you like any of these?" Jonathan asked, watching Tanya study a colorful painting of children playing in a park. "This one reminds me of Grace," she said, pointing to the playground scene. "Look how happy they all look. Would you like to have it?" "Oh no, it's too expensive. I just like looking at art sometimes. It makes me dream about different possibilities." Jonathan made a mental note of the painting's title and artist. For dinner, he took her to a cozy Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths and candles on every table. "This is perfect," Tanya said, looking around at the warm, welcoming atmosphere. "I wanted somewhere we could really talk without distractions." Over pasta and wine they shared stories from their childhoods. Jonathan told her about growing up lonely in boarding schools while his parents traveled the world for business. "That sounds sad," Tanya said sympathetically. "It was. I learned to take care of myself very young, but I never learned how to let other people take care of me." "Is that why you don't have a family of your own?" Jonathan considered the question carefully. "I think I was waiting for the right people to come along. I just didn't know it until now." Tanya felt her cheeks warm. "Jonathan, I know this is moving fast and I don't want to scare you away, but I need you to know how I feel." "How do you feel?" "Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you and Grace. Like everything that happened before was just leading me to that moment in the restaurant when you decided to help a stranger." "I'm falling for you too," Tanya admitted quietly. "And that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because Grace is already calling you her friend and she asks about you every day. If this doesn't work out." "It's going to work out." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can." "Do you want to know how?" Tanya nodded. "Because I've never felt this way about anyone before. Because when I imagine my future, you and Grace are in every single scene. Because I would rather spend one day making you both happy than a lifetime doing anything else." Tears gathered in Tanya's eyes. "You really mean that?" "Every word." After dinner they walked along the riverside path under the stars. Jonathan stopped and turned to face her. "Tanya, I know we haven't known each other very long, but I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm not just successful at my job. I'm actually very wealthy. I didn't want to tell you before because I wanted you to like me for who I am, not what I have." Tanya studied his face in the moonlight. "How wealthy?" "Wealthy enough that you and Grace would never have to worry about money again. Wealthy enough to send Grace to any college she wants. Wealthy enough to help you go back to school if that's what you want." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want to be completely honest with you about everything. And because I hope someday you'll let me share it all with you." Instead of being impressed or excited, Tanya looked worried. "I don't want your money, Jonathan. I want to take care of myself and Grace." "I know. That's one of the things I love most about you. But love means wanting to help the people who matter most to you. It means sharing everything you have with them." "Did you just say you love me?" Jonathan realized what he had said and smiled. "Yes, I did. I love you, Tanya Williams. I love your strength and your kindness and your beautiful laugh. I love the way you put Grace first in everything. I love that you helped a stranger without thinking twice about it." "I love you too," Tanya whispered. "I think I have since that first night." Jonathan kissed her gently under the stars and for both of them, it felt like coming home. What do you think happens when two people from completely different worlds fall in love? Subscribe to find out how Tanya and Jonathan navigate their growing relationship. 2 months into their relationship, Jonathan invited Tanya to accompany him to his company's annual dinner. It was a formal event where he would be recognized for his business achievements. I don't know if I belong at something like that, Tanya said nervously, looking through her small closet for something appropriate to wear. You belong wherever I am, Jonathan assured her. Besides, I want everyone to meet the woman who changed my life. Grace, who was getting ready for another evening with Mrs. Johnson, overheard the conversation. Mommy, you should wear the pretty blue dress from the back of the closet. What blue dress? Tanya asked. The one you said was too fancy to wear anywhere. Tanya pulled out a navy blue dress she had bought years ago for a job interview but never had occasion to wear. This old thing? You'll look stunning, Jonathan said confidently. The company dinner was held at the city's most elegant hotel. Tanya felt overwhelmed by the crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork and formally dressed guests. Everyone looks so important, she whispered to Jonathan as they entered the ballroom. You're the most important person here, he replied, placing his hand supportively on her lower back. Throughout the cocktail hour, Jonathan introduced Tanya to his business partners, employees and industry colleagues. Most people were polite and friendly, though Tanya could sense some surprise at Jonathan's choice of companion. So you work at a restaurant? Asked Patricia Blackwell, the wife of Jonathan's biggest investor. Yes, I'm a server at Romano's family restaurant, Tanya replied honestly. How interesting, Patricia said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jonathan stepped closer to Tanya. Tanya is also studying to become a teacher. She's one of the smartest people I know. It wasn't exactly true about the studying part, but Tanya appreciated his support. During dinner, Tanya found herself seated next to Robert Chin, Jonathan's business partner and closest friend. So you're the famous Tanya, Robert said warmly. Jonathan talks about you and your daughter constantly. He's been wonderful to us, Tanya replied. He's different since he met you. Happier. More relaxed. We used to have to force him to take vacations, and now he leaves the office at reasonable hours to spend time with you and Grace. Really? Really? In 10 years of business partnership, I've never seen him like this. When Jonathan was called to the stage to accept an award for Entrepreneur of the Year, Tanya watched with pride as he spoke about innovation, leadership and giving back to the community. This award isn't just mine, Jonathan said, looking directly at Tanya. Success means nothing without people to share it with. This year, I learned that the most important achievements happen outside of boardrooms and office buildings. They happen when we open our hearts to love and family. The audience applauded politely, though some looked puzzled by his personal comments. After the ceremony, Patricia Blackwell approached Tanya again, this time with a sharper tone. I hope you understand what you're getting into, dear. Jonathan's world is very complicated. There are expectations, social obligations, and frankly, people might question whether you're with him for the right reasons. Tanya felt her face flush with anger, but before she could respond, Jonathan appeared at her side. Patricia, I hope you're not bothering my girlfriend with unnecessary advice, he said coolly. I was just making conversation, Patricia replied with false sweetness. No, you weren't. And if I hear you've been rude to Tanya again, you and your husband can find a new company to invest in. Patricia's eyes widened in shock and she quickly excused herself. You didn't have to do that, Tanya said quietly. Yes, I did. No one talks to the woman I love that way. As they prepared to leave, several other guests approached them with genuine warmth and interest. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who ran the company's community outreach program, was particularly friendly. Jonathan told me you're interested in education, she said to Tanya. We're always looking for volunteers for our youth literacy program. Would you be interested? I would love that, Tanya replied enthusiastically. Wonderful. Here's my card. Call me next week and we'll set something up. On the drive home, Tanya was quiet, processing the evening's events. You okay? Jonathan asked. That woman was right about one thing. Your world is very different from mine. So maybe we're too different. Maybe this won't work. Jonathan pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face her. Tanya, look at me. She reluctantly met his eyes. I don't care about their world. I care about our world. You, me and Grace. That's what matters. But your business, your reputation. We'll be fine. Actually, they'll be better because I have you in my life. You make me want to be a better person, a better leader, a better man. Even if some people don't approve? Especially then. The people who matter will see what I see in you. And the ones who don't aren't worth our time. When they arrived at Tanya's apartment, Mrs. Johnson reported that Grace had been an angel and was fast asleep. How was your fancy dinner? Mrs. Johnson asked quietly. Interesting, Tanya replied diplomatically. Did they like our Tanya? The older woman asked Jonathan protectively. The smart ones did, Jonathan answered with a smile. And those are the only opinions I care about. After Mrs. Johnson left, Tanya and Jonathan sat on her small couch, her head resting on his shoulder. Are you sure about this? She asked. About us. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Even though I embarrassed you tonight? Jonathan sat up and looked at her in surprise. You embarrassed me? How? I didn't know which fork to use for the salad. I called Mr. Chin by his first name when I should have been more formal. I wore a dress that cost $30 when everyone else was wearing designer clothes. And you were the most beautiful, genuine person in that entire room. You made Robert laugh with your stories about Grace. You asked thoughtful questions about everyone's work. You were perfect. I don't feel perfect. Perfect for me, Jonathan clarified, pulling her closer. That's all that matters. As he held her, Tanya realized that Jonathan wasn't just accepting her world, he was choosing it over his own. And that made all the difference. The following weekend, Jonathan took Tanya and Grace to his penthouse for the first time. Grace was amazed by the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the city. Do you live in the clouds? She asked, pressing her nose against the glass. It feels like it sometimes, Jonathan laughed. While Grace explored the spacious rooms, Tanya stood in the modern kitchen, feeling overwhelmed by the expensive appliances and marble countertops. This place is incredible, she said. It's just a place. It doesn't feel like home. What does home feel like to you? Jonathan looked at Grace, who was now jumping on his leather couch, and then at Tanya. Like this. Like laughter and warmth and people who care about each other. After lunch, Grace found a photo album on Jonathan's coffee table and began flipping through it with curiosity. Mr. Jonathan, where are your mommy and daddy in these pictures? Jonathan sat down next to her and Tanya joined them on the couch. The album was filled with photos of Jonathan at various ages, but mostly alone or with hired caregivers. My parents traveled a lot for work, Jonathan explained gently. They weren't home very much. That's sad. My mommy is always with me. You're very lucky to have such a wonderful mommy. Grace studied a photo of 8-year-old Jonathan at what appeared to be a boarding school. You look lonely. I was sometimes. Didn't you have any friends? A few, but most of the time I just focused on my studies and learning about business. Tanya's heart ached as she looked at the photos. Even in pictures where Jonathan was smiling, she could see the sadness in his young eyes. Where are your parents now? She asked softly. They died in a car accident when I was 25. We weren't very close, but I still miss the idea of having them around. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was. I threw myself into building my company because I didn't know what else to do. Work became my family, success became my identity. Grace closed the album and climbed onto Jonathan's lap. But now you have us. Yes, now I have you, Jonathan agreed, hugging her close. Later that evening, after Grace had fallen asleep on Jonathan's couch while watching a movie, Tanya and Jonathan talked quietly on his balcony. I need to tell you about Grace's father, Tanya said, looking out at the city lights. You don't have to if you're not ready. I want to. You've been so honest with me about your past. Jonathan waited patiently for her to continue. His name was Kevin. We met in college and dated for 2 years. I thought we were serious, maybe even heading toward marriage. When I found out I was pregnant, I was scared but also excited. I thought he would be too. But he wasn't. He said I had ruined everything. That we were too young, that a baby would destroy our futures. He wanted me to not have the baby. Jonathan took her hand gently. I couldn't do that. I already loved Grace, even though she was just a tiny possibility then. Kevin said if I kept the baby he was leaving. So I chose Grace and he chose his freedom. Have you heard from him since? A few times over the years. He sends a birthday card occasionally, but he's never asked to see Grace or be part of her life. She thinks he moved to another country for work. What will you tell her when she gets older? The truth, I guess. That sometimes people aren't ready to be parents, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with her. She's better off without him. I know. It just makes me sad that she'll never know what it's like to have a father who loves her unconditionally. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, watching Grace sleep peacefully inside. What if she did? He asked softly. What do you mean? What if Grace had a father who loved her unconditionally? Someone who would never leave, never let her down, never make her question her worth. Tanya felt her heart start racing. Jonathan. I know we haven't been together very long, but I love that little girl like she's already my daughter. I love you like I never thought I could love anyone. I want to be the father Grace deserves and the partner you deserve. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more in my life. I want to adopt Grace legally, give her my name, make sure she knows every single day how wanted and loved she is. Tears streamed down Tanya's face. She would love that. She asks me all the time if you're going to stay forever. What do you tell her? I tell her I hope so. Tell her yes, Jonathan said, pulling Tanya into his arms. Tell her Daddy is never going away. The next morning, Grace woke up early and found Tanya and Jonathan having coffee in the kitchen. She climbed onto Jonathan's lap, still sleepy from the night before. Mr. Jonathan, can I ask you something important? Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything. Grace looked at him with her big, serious eyes. Do you love my mommy? Yes, I do. Very much. Do you love me too? Yes, Grace. I love you very much too. Then why don't you live with us? Tanya nearly choked on her coffee. Grace, honey. It's okay, Jonathan said gently. That's a fair question. He looked down at Grace, who was waiting patiently for his answer. Well, when grown-ups love each other very much, sometimes they decide to get married first before they live together. It's a special promise they make to always take care of each other. Like in my fairy tale books? Exactly like that. Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking hard. Then she looked up at Jonathan with hope in her eyes. Are you going to marry my mommy? Would you like me to? Yes. Then you could be my daddy and we could all live together like a real family. Tanya felt tears gathering in her eyes. Gracie, you can't just ask people to get married. Why not? Sophie's mom asked her boyfriend to marry them, and now Sophie has a new daddy who takes her to soccer practice. Jonathan laughed softly. Your daughter has excellent logic. She gets that from my grandmother too, Tanya said, wiping her eyes. That afternoon, while Grace was napping, Jonathan asked Tanya to take a walk with him to the nearby park where they had spent their first afternoon together. This is where I first realized I was falling in love with you, he said as they sat on the same bench where they had watched Grace play. Really? I thought it was when I protected you from those men. No, that's when I knew you were special. But this is where I knew you were the one. What made you realize it? Watching you watch Grace. Seeing how proud you were of her, how much you wanted her to be happy. I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life making sure you both felt that happy every day. Jonathan stood up and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Jonathan, what are you doing? Something I should have done weeks ago. He got down on one knee and Tanya gasped. Tanya Williams, you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me what real love looks like, what family means, what home feels like. You and Grace have made me complete in a way I never thought possible. He opened the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring with smaller stones surrounding it. The big diamond is for you, and each little diamond represents our family as it grows. Will you marry me? Will you let me be Grace's father and your husband? Will you let me love you both for the rest of my life? Tanya was crying too hard to speak, but she managed to nod her head yes. Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. How did you know my size? I borrowed one of your rings last week when you weren't looking. You sneaky man, she laughed through her tears. Is that a yes? Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed as other people in the park began to notice and smile at the romantic scene. We have to tell Grace, Tanya said excitedly. Actually, I already asked for her permission. When? This morning when you were in the shower. I told her I wanted to marry you and asked if she would like me to be her daddy officially. What did she say? She said, and I quote, "It's about time, Mr. Jonathan. I've been waiting forever." They walked home hand in hand, both practically glowing with happiness. When they arrived at the apartment, Grace took one look at her mother's face and started jumping up and down. Did he ask you? Did he ask you? He asked me and I said yes. Grace ran to Jonathan and threw her arms around his waist. Does this mean you're really going to be my daddy? If that's what you want. I want it more than anything in the whole world. Then that's what I'll be. Your daddy forever and always. That evening they called Mrs. Johnson over to share the good news. The elderly woman cried happy tears and insisted on making her special chocolate cake to celebrate. I knew it from the first time I saw you two together, she told Jonathan. You looked at them like they were the most precious things in the world. They are. As they tucked Grace into bed that night, she looked up at them with pure contentment. Now we're going to be a real family, she said sleepily. We already were a real family, Tanya corrected gently. Now we're just going to make it official. Good. I can't wait to tell Sophie I'm getting a daddy. After Grace fell asleep, Tanya and Jonathan sat on the couch, planning their future together. Where should we live? Tanya asked. Your place is beautiful, but it doesn't feel like a family home. I was thinking we could look for a house together. Somewhere with a big backyard for Grace to play, and maybe room for more children someday. More children? If you want them. I'd love to have babies with you. Tanya smiled. Grace would love having little brothers or sisters. Then it settled. We'll find the perfect family house and fill it with love and laughter. As they made plans for their wedding and their future, both Tanya and Jonathan marveled at how their lives had changed so completely. A chance encounter had become the greatest love story either of them could have imagined. 6 months later, Jonathan had planned the most important evening of his life. He wanted to propose to Tanya at Romano's family restaurant, the place where they had first met, surrounded by the people who had become like family to them. Mrs. Patterson, the restaurant manager, was thrilled to help coordinate the surprise. The entire staff was in on the plan, including Grace, who could barely contain her excitement. Remember, you can't tell Mommy anything, Jonathan reminded her as they got ready to leave for what Tanya thought was just a regular dinner. I won't tell Daddy Jonathan, Grace promised, using the name she had started calling him. Tanya was suspicious when they arrived at Romano's to find it unusually crowded for a Tuesday evening, and even more suspicious when Mrs. Patterson seated them at the exact table where Jonathan had been attacked months earlier. Isn't this where? Tanya began. Where we met, Jonathan finished. I thought it would be nice to have dinner where our story began. As they ordered their meal, Tanya noticed that many of the restaurant's regular customers kept looking over at their table and smiling. Why is everyone staring at us? Maybe because you look beautiful tonight, Jonathan said, which was true. Tanya was wearing the same red dress she had worn on their first official date. During dinner, Jonathan seemed nervous, checking his watch frequently and glancing toward the kitchen. Are you okay? You seem anxious about something. Just thinking about work, he lied smoothly. When they finished eating, Mrs. Patterson appeared with a special dessert plate covered with a silver dome. This is from the kitchen, she announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. As she lifted the dome, instead of dessert, there was a small microphone and a note that read, "Will you marry me?" Tanya gasped as Jonathan stood up and took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying through the now quiet restaurant, 6 months ago, I was attacked right here at this table. A beautiful woman and her amazing daughter came to my rescue, and in doing so, they rescued my heart as well. The customers began to murmur excitedly as they realized what was happening. Jonathan continued, Tanya, you showed me what true courage looks like when you protected a stranger without thinking of your own safety. You showed me what unconditional love looks like when I watched you with Grace. You showed me what home feels like when you welcome me into your lives. He set down the microphone and got down on one knee beside the table. Tanya was already crying as he pulled out the ring box. Tanya Williams, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and Grace for the rest of our lives? Will you make me the happiest man in the world? Yes. Tanya exclaimed through her tears. Yes, of course. The entire restaurant erupted in cheers and applause as Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger. Grace ran over from where she had been watching with Mrs. Patterson and threw herself into their group hug. We did it, Daddy Jonathan. We surprised Mommy. You sure did, Princess. Customers came over to congratulate them, sharing in their joy as if they were old friends. Several people mentioned that they had been hoping for this moment ever since word had spread about the romantic story of how Tanya and Jonathan met. You're like our own real-life fairy tale, one elderly customer told them. The celebration continued late into the evening with the restaurant staff bringing out champagne and a cake they had secretly prepared. Grace was allowed to stay up past her bedtime to enjoy the special occasion. How long have you been planning this? Tanya asked Jonathan as they danced to soft music playing from the restaurant's sound system. Since the day I met you. I knew I wanted to marry you before I even knew your last name. I love you so much. I love you too. Both of you. My whole world. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson pulled Tanya aside. I've been working here for 20 years, and I've never seen anything as beautiful as what happened between you two tonight. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Thank you for helping make this so special. Thank you for showing all of us what real love looks like. On the drive home, Grace chattered excitedly about the proposal from the back seat. Did you really not know, Mommy? I thought for sure you figured it out when Mrs. Patterson kept winking at Daddy Jonathan. I had no idea, Tanya laughed. You're all very good secret keepers. Wait until you see what we have planned for the wedding, Grace said mischievously. Grace? Jonathan said in mock warning. Oops. I'm not supposed to tell about that part yet. That night, as they tucked Grace into bed, she looked at them with pure happiness. I'm going to have the best wedding ever, she announced. You're not getting married, sweetheart? Mommy and Daddy Jonathan are, Tanya corrected gently. But I get to be the flower girl, so it's kind of my wedding too. You're absolutely right, Jonathan agreed. It's our whole family's wedding. Good. Because I've been planning it in my head for months. After Grace fell asleep, Tanya and Jonathan sat on the couch looking at her ring, still amazed by the evening's events. I can't believe we're engaged, Tanya said, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. I can't believe I get to marry the most wonderful woman in the world. When should we have the wedding? Tomorrow? Jonathan suggested hopefully. I think Grace would never forgive us if we didn't let her plan her part properly. Then whenever you and our wedding coordinator decide, Jonathan laughed, referring to Grace. As they made preliminary plans for their wedding, both of them marveled at how perfectly their lives had aligned. What had started as a moment of crisis had become the foundation for a love story that would last forever. 8 months later, Tanya stood in the bridal suite at the Grand Riverside Hotel, looking at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves that Grace had insisted were princess-like. You look like a fairy tale, Mommy, Grace said, adjusting her own flower girl dress, which was a miniature version of Tanya's in pale pink. Mrs. Johnson was there helping with final preparations, tears in her eyes as she looked at the woman she considered a daughter. Your grandmother Rose would be so proud, she said, fastening Tanya's pearl necklace, something borrowed from Mrs. Johnson's own jewelry collection. I wish she could be here to see this, Tanya said wistfully. She is here, honey. I can feel her love surrounding all of us today. There was a soft knock at the door, and Mrs. Patterson entered with a beautiful bouquet of sunflowers mixed with white roses. From the groom, she announced. And he wanted me to give you this. She handed Tanya a handwritten note that read, Thank you for saving my life in every way that matters. I can't wait to call you my wife. All my love, Jonathan. Are you ready, Mrs. Mitchell, to be? Mrs. Johnson asked. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Downstairs in the hotel's elegant ballroom, Jonathan stood at the altar wearing a navy blue tuxedo, his hands slightly trembling with nervous excitement. The room was decorated with sunflowers and white roses, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Robert Chin stood beside him as best man, while Dr. Sarah Martinez had agreed to be Tanya's maid of honor. The guest list was small but meaningful, including restaurant staff from Romano's, neighbors from Tanya's apartment building, some of Jonathan's closest business associates, and Mrs. Johnson's extended family who had become like relatives to Grace. The music began and Grace walked down the aisle first, scattering rose petals with serious concentration. She looked absolutely radiant, and several guests wiped away tears at her obvious joy. Then Tanya appeared at the back of the room and Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. She was more beautiful than he had ever seen her, practically glowing with happiness as she walked toward him. Since Tanya's father wasn't alive to walk her down the aisle, she had asked Mrs. Johnson to do the honor. The elderly woman beamed with pride as she escorted Tanya to the altar, where Jonathan was waiting with tears in his eyes. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? The minister asked. All of us who love her, Mrs. Johnson replied, causing several people in the audience to cry happy tears. As Tanya and Jonathan faced each other and began their vows, Grace stood beside them, holding their rings on a special pillow. Tanya, Jonathan began, his voice strong and clear, 8 months ago you saved me from an attack, but what you really saved me from was a life without love. You showed me what it means to be truly brave, not just in moments of danger but in everyday acts of kindness. You taught me that family isn't about blood or money or success. It's about choosing to love someone every single day, no matter what challenges come your way. He paused to wipe away a tear. I promise to love you and Grace unconditionally. I promise to support your dreams and celebrate your victories. I promise to be the father Grace deserves and the husband you deserve. I promise to never take for granted the miracle of being part of your family. Tanya was crying as she began her vows. Jonathan, when I decided to help a stranger that night at the restaurant, I had no idea I was actually helping myself find the love I had given up believing in. You didn't just accept Grace and me as we were, you made us better by loving us so completely. She looked over at Grace, who was listening intently. You kept every promise you ever made to us. You showed up when you said you would. You fixed our car and our hearts. You made Grace feel like the most important little girl in the world, and you made me feel like I deserved to be loved. Turning back to Jonathan, she continued, I promise to love you with the same fierce protectiveness I felt that night when I saw you in danger. I promise to support your dreams and remind you every day what an amazing man you are. I promise to build a beautiful life with you, filled with laughter and kindness and all the love our hearts can hold." When it came time to exchange rings, Grace carefully handed them over, whispering loudly, "Don't drop them. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." As Jonathan and Tanya kissed, Grace cheered loudly, "Yay! Now we're officially a family." The reception was filled with dancing, laughter, and heartfelt speeches. Robert Chin toasted Jonathan's transformation from a lonely workaholic to a devoted family man. Mrs. Patterson shared the story of how the restaurant staff had all been rooting for their romance from the very beginning. But the most touching moment came when Grace stood up with her own little microphone to give a speech. "I want to thank everyone for coming to my family's wedding," she began confidently. "My mommy always told me that families come in different shapes and sizes, and that love is what makes them real. Daddy Jonathan loved us even when we didn't have much money or fancy things. He played with me and fixed our car and made my mommy smile every day." She paused and looked at her new parents. "Now I have the best mommy and the best daddy in the whole world, and I promise to be the best daughter ever. And maybe someday I'll have a little brother or sister to play with." The guests laughed and applauded as Grace took a dramatic bow. Later in the evening, as the celebration continued, Jonathan pulled Tanya aside for a private moment. "I have one more surprise for you," he said mysteriously. "Jonathan, you've already given me everything I could ever want." "Not quite everything." He handed her an envelope with her name written in elegant script. "What's this?" "Open it and see." Inside the envelope was a deed to Romano's family restaurant. "I don't understand," Tanya said, looking at the legal document. "Mrs. Patterson was planning to close the restaurant next month. She can't afford to keep it running anymore. So I bought it." "You bought the restaurant?" "For us. I thought maybe you'd like to run it, make it exactly the kind of place you've always dreamed of. We could expand the menu, maybe add some community programs for families. What do you think?" Tanya stared at the deed, overwhelmed. "You want me to run Romano's?" "I want you to do whatever makes you happy. If that's teaching, we'll make sure you can go back to school. If that's running a restaurant, we'll make it the best family restaurant in the city. If that's staying home with Grace and maybe some future siblings, that's perfect too. I think I'd love to run Romano's. But as a partnership. You and me together." "Together," Jonathan agreed, kissing her forehead. Just then, Grace ran over to them, slightly out of breath from dancing. "Mommy, Daddy, are you ready for cake?" "We're ready for everything," Tanya replied, pulling her daughter into their embrace. As they walked back to join their wedding guests, Tanya realized that her fairy tale was just beginning. She had started that evening 8 months ago as a single mother working to make ends meet. Now she was a wife, a business owner, and part of a love story that proved sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected moments. The three of them cut the cake together, with Grace helping to guide the knife while their friends and family cheered. In that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and endless possibilities, Tanya knew that every challenge she had faced, every sacrifice she had made, had been worth it to arrive at this perfect beginning. Their happily ever after wasn't an ending at all. It was the start of the greatest adventure of their lives.